The text came in at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday, while I was standing barefoot on the cold tile of my hotel bathroom in Delwood, Ohio, still wearing the hotel robe, my hair half-pinned. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the edge of the sink, very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have gone strange on you. The robe was too thin for the air conditioning. The tile was cold through my socks. Something settled in the center of my chest. Not rage, not grief, something older and quieter than either of those, like a door that had been slightly ajar for 31 years had finally, fully closed. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Then I picked up my grandmother's ivory clutch from the counter, ran my thumb across the brass zipper pull, cold, spinning 1/4 turn before it caught, the way it always did, and I went to go get married. My name is Nora Callahan. I was 31 years old that Thursday, a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm, the kind of job that means you are the person who makes sure everything happens on time and in the right order and that no one else has to think about it. I had held that job for 6 years. I was good at it in the way that some people are good at things that never quite get named at family dinners. My brother Marcus was 26. He was between things, between jobs, between cities, between whatever the last plan had been and whatever the next one would become. My parents, Ray and Connie Callahan of Pinecroft Avenue, Delwood, did not experience Marcus's betweenness as a problem. They experienced it as a condition requiring management, the way you manage weather. You adjust your plans around it. You keep the calendar loose. I had understood this about my family for long enough that it no longer surprised me. What it did, instead, was sit. A specific weight behind the sternum, not sharp, just present, the way an old injury reminds you of itself in cold weather. Daniel came into my life 18 months before that Thursday. We met through work. He was the operations director for a regional freight company that had contracted with mine, and we spent 3 months coordinating a complicated equipment transfer before we ever had a conversation that wasn't about documentation. When we finally did, it lasted 4 hours at a diner near the Crestfield Events Center and ended with him asking if I wanted to do it again sometime without the spreadsheets. I said yes. We were careful and deliberate about the whole thing, the way two people who have both learned to be careful are. By the time he proposed, 14 months in, I knew his handwriting and his silences and exactly how he took his coffee and which of his opinions were negotiable and which were not. I said yes to that too. We planned the wedding ourselves. That was a decision we made early and stuck to. The Crestfield Events Center, a venue I had driven past 100 times, booked and paid for with a deposit of $34,180 between the two of us. My name on the contract, his name on the backup card, split straight down the middle. We chose the menu together. We addressed the invitations together. We decided on a string quartet because Daniel's mother had always wanted one and she was not well enough to travel, so we brought the music to her through a video feed. My parents were invited. They confirmed they were coming. That confirmation held for 4 months. What I had given my family over the years did not arrive in a single large gesture. It arrived the way most real things arrive. In increments, in the spaces between other people's plans, in the form of tasks that needed doing because I was the one who knew how to do them. I covered the gap in my mother's car payment the winter Marcus was in between jobs the first time, when the account ran short and no one said anything directly, but my mother mentioned it twice in the same phone call. I drove my father to his cardiac follow-up appointments for the better part of a year after his procedure, because he didn't like driving on the highway since the incident and Marcus was in Portland that year, or maybe it was Denver, I couldn't recall which in which order. I handled the insurance paperwork when the Pinecroft Avenue roof needed replacing, spent 3 weekends on phone calls with adjusters and contractors, negotiated the final number, filed the supplemental claim. It came out right. No one mentioned it afterward, but it came out right. I kept the family's logistical life running the way I kept my professional life running. Quietly, thoroughly, without requiring anyone to notice. I told myself for a long time that this was simply how I was built. I was not sure I believed it as completely at 31 as I had at 22. There were other contributions that were harder to name because they had no single transaction attached to them. The weekends I stayed local when I had planned to travel, the conversations I managed so my parents didn't have to, the way I positioned myself as the stable one so consistently that stability became something they counted on without counting it. That kind of contribution doesn't appear on any ledger, but it accumulates the same way everything else does. The money I had moved toward Marcus over those years was harder to quantify in round numbers, because it rarely arrived as a direct transfer. It arrived as the vacation I didn't take so the family account stayed cushioned for his next transition. It arrived as $7,340 I'd deposited into the travel account my parents kept in his name across 3 years of what they called investments in his future. It arrived as the birthday and Christmas gifts I scaled back on my own end so there was always something left over for his. I am not saying this as accusation. I was saying it because it was the record, and the record mattered when you were trying to understand how a family arrived at a place where a daughter's wedding became a little party. Marcus, in fairness, was not cruel. He was not calculating. He was simply the one the family had organized itself around for so long that no one, including him, thought to question it. He moved through the world assuming that his needs would be accommodated because they always had been. He was going to Cancún that week with 3 friends. A trip planned after the wedding date was already set, confirmed, and paid for, and when the conflict became clear, the math my parents did was swift and, to them, apparently obvious. The trip was non-refundable, my mother told me on the phone the night before the wedding. The flights, the resort, it was all locked in. She said this with the patience of someone explaining a utility bill. She said Marcus would be devastated to miss it. I asked her what about the wedding. She said, "Nora, honey, it's not like we won't celebrate. We'll do a dinner when we're back. You're so capable, you don't really need us there standing around." Something went still in my hands, not anger, not yet, just a kind of precise attention, the way your vision sharpens in low light. "I need you there," I said. "It's my wedding." "You've always been so independent," she said, which was not an answer. "Mom, Marcus needs this trip. He's been going through a hard time." "When is he not going through a hard time?" A pause. Then, "That's an ungrateful thing to say about your brother, Nora. He hasn't had the advantages you've had." I did not respond to that. The silence stretched out for several seconds, long enough that I heard her shift the phone from one ear to the other. "We'll send something nice," she said. "We'll make it up to you." I said goodnight and hung up. My father called at 6:52 a.m., 5 minutes after the text. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it once while I finished my coffee. He said he was sorry the timing had worked out this way. He said he hoped I understood that family meant sometimes making hard calls. He said Daniel seemed like a good man and he was sure the day would be beautiful. He said, "Your mother and I," 3 times in 40 seconds, which had always been the signal that the decision was already made and the call was courtesy. I deleted the voicemail. I set the phone on the dresser. I finished my coffee. I went to the bathroom and completed my makeup. I did my lipstick last, the way my grandmother had always done. I smoothed the front of my dress once with both palms. I picked up the ivory clutch and felt the zipper pull, spin, and catch. I called the hotel concierge and asked for a car to the Crestfield Events Center. I texted Daniel, "Ready." He replied in 11 seconds with a single word, "Good." I rode the elevator down alone. The doors opened onto the lobby. I walked through it and out the front doors into the September morning, where the air was cool and carried the faint smell of cut grass from the median, and I stood on the curb and waited for the car, and I did not look at my phone again. Gerald Marsh was 73 years old, a retired electrician who had lived next door to Daniel's parents on Fenwick Court since 1987. He had met me exactly 3 weeks prior at the rehearsal dinner, where he'd sat across from me and asked careful, interested questions about project coordination for 40 minutes, and told me twice that Daniel was a good man and he meant it. When I arrived at the Crestfield Events Center and Daniel told him what had happened, quietly, briefly, standing in the anteroom off the main hall, Gerald didn't say much. He straightened his tie. He offered me his arm. "Ready when you are," he said. I took his arm. The brass zipper pull on my clutch pressed against my palm. I felt the weight of it, not heavy, just present, a small thing I had carried the full length of the morning. The hall held about 80 people. White chairs, the string quartet Daniel had arranged, September light coming through the tall windows along the east wall in long, pale columns. I had seen this room a dozen times in planning mode, clipboard in hand, talking to the venue coordinator about sightlines and audio placement and table configurations. I had never seen it like this, full and still. Everyone turned toward the aisle. I walked it on Gerald's arm. The quartet played something I had chosen 6 months earlier at a planning table, and hearing it now, in the actual room, I understood for the first time what it would have meant to have chosen it and never heard it played. I kept my chin level. I reached the end and Daniel took my hand and his grip was steady and specific and I held on to it. We were married by 11:15 a.m. The clip was 47 seconds long. A guest named Petra, who worked with Daniel and had been sitting in the third row on the left, took it on her phone without thinking much about it. She said later she just wanted to remember the light. It caught the moment Gerald handed me off to Daniel, the way Gerald patted my hand once before he stepped back, the way Daniel looked at me when I reached him. Petra posted it that evening. By midnight it had 30,000 views. By Sunday morning it had crossed 1 million. The caption she wrote was simple. She walked the aisle on the arm of her husband's neighbor because her family didn't show. Look at his face when she gets to him. She had not asked my permission. I did not know about it until Sunday afternoon, when Daniel showed me his phone. I watched it once. Then I set the phone down on the kitchen table and went to make tea. My mother called for the first time at 6:14 a.m. on Monday. I was already awake. I let it ring. She called again at 6:19. And at 6:23. By 9 a.m. the count was at 31. By noon it was 61. I know the number because Daniel kept a tally on the notepad we keep by the kitchen phone, his handwriting small and even, a new mark every time the cell buzzed. At 12:40 p.m. I picked up. Nora. Her voice had a texture I hadn't heard before. Tight, slightly elevated, the register she used when something had gone sideways in a way she hadn't planned for. "Mom," I said. "Your father's boss saw the video." I waited. "Richard Hargrove," she said. "He called your father into his office this morning." He said. She stopped. Started again. "He knows Daniel." Apparently Daniel's company and Hargrove and Sons have been in a partnership conversation for another stop. "Richard Hargrove asked your father why his daughter walked the aisle without her family." I didn't say anything. "Nora, your father was humiliated." Something moved through me. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Something more like the sensation of a room coming into accurate focus after a long time of looking at it slightly wrong. "I need you to understand," she said, "that we didn't know. We didn't know who Daniel was connected to. We didn't know any of this would." "Mom," I said. She stopped. "You knew it was my wedding." Silence. "You texted me at 6:47 in the morning on the day I was getting married," I said. "You called it a little party. We were going to celebrate when we got back. You told me I was ungrateful for asking about my brother. You told me I didn't need you there. Nora, we made a mistake, I can see that now." "I know you can," I said. "That's what I want you to sit with." I reached into the clutch. I felt the laminated edge of the vendor contract, the one from the Crestfield Event Center, my name on the signature line, the deposit figure printed in the lower right corner, $34,180, a number I had arrived at and paid and stood behind without asking anyone for help. I pulled it out. I set it flat on the kitchen table in front of me. I looked at my name on it. "You didn't miss a wedding that needed you to function," I said. "You missed a wedding I built. There's a difference." She started to say something. I could hear her forming the shape of the next sentence. The softening, the redirect, the pivot toward what your father is dealing with at work. "I'm going to go now," I said. "Have a good trip home." I ended the call. I set the phone down next to the contract. I sat with both of them on the table in front of me for a long moment. The phone silent, the contract flat and laminated and specific, my name printed at the bottom in clean black ink. Then I folded the contract back along its original crease, tucked it into the clutch, and went to find Daniel. 4 months passed the way good months do, not quickly exactly, but without the wait that makes time feel slow. Daniel and I settled into the apartment on Fenwick Court, 2 blocks from where Gerald Marsh still lived and still waved from his driveway when we drove past. We kept a household binder, insurance documents, lease, utility accounts, the practical architecture of a shared life, and I had slid the laminated vendor contract from the Crestfield Events Center into the back pocket of it, behind the divider tab I'd labeled reference. It stuck out a quarter-inch past the edge of the binder. I used it sometimes as a bookmark without thinking about it, the way you use what's at hand. My mother wrote a letter in November. 3 pages, handwritten, on the cream stationery she kept in the secretary desk at Pinecroft Avenue. I recognized the envelope when it came. I held it for a moment. The paper weight of it, the careful loops of my name in her handwriting on the front. I set it on the kitchen counter. I made coffee. I went to work. When I came home it was still there. I moved it to the drawer under the counter where we kept takeout menus and expired coupons and the manual for the dishwasher. I had not opened it. My father had not called. Marcus sent a text in October. "Hey, hope the wedding was great, sorry we missed it, Cancún was sick," which I read and did not answer, not because there was nothing left that needed saying, but because there was genuinely nothing I needed to say. Life on Fenwick Court was quiet in the way I used to think quiet meant nothing was happening. I understood now it meant something was holding. Daniel made coffee before I was awake most mornings. Gerald came for dinner on the first Sunday of every month and always brought something from his garden. Last month it was a paper bag of late-season tomatoes, the kind that are slightly too ripe and taste exactly right. I was working on a promotion that I expected to have confirmed by spring. I slept well. If you have ever been the person your family called capable, the one who handled things, the one who didn't need, the one whose events were little parties and whose absence was something they could manage around, then you know that the hardest thing is not the moment they fail you. The hardest thing is the moment you realize you had been arranging your life around preventing that moment for years, and it happened anyway, and you were fine. You walked the aisle. You held someone's hand. The light came through the windows. 61 calls came in on a Monday, and you let them. If this story landed somewhere true for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Some people will understand exactly what you mean without any explanation at all. The vendor contract is still in the household binder, behind the reference tab, sticking out its quarter-inch past the edge. I see it every time I open the binder to look something up. I have not moved it. It is doing fine right where it is.